The first thing to understand about this story is that nothing explodes, no one collapses into tears, and no life changes overnight. It begins quietly, the way most meaningful shifts do, almost unnoticed. On a Wednesday evening that felt like every other Wednesday, Daniel Hartley stood in his kitchen rinsing a single mug he hadn't finished. The house was calm in the practiced way calm becomes when you're raising a child alone, toys lined up a little too neatly, dinner dishes stacked with intention, lights dimmed early because sleep mattered more than conversation. Daniel was what people casually called a millionaire, though he never used the word himself. He ran a mid-sized software logistics company that paid well, required long hours, and rewarded structure. His life was efficient, predictable, controlled. And for a long time, that had felt like the same thing as stable. Across the hallway, his 7-year-old son, Leo, was brushing his teeth with the kind of exaggerated seriousness only children can muster when they sense they're being watched. The nanny, Mara, waited by the door, coat folded over her arm, shoes already on. She had worked for Daniel for just over a year, long enough to become part of the house's rhythm, short enough to still feel like a presence rather than a fixture. She was good at her job. Not in a performative way, not in the way that inspired effusive praise, but in a steady, reliable way that made her easy to overlook. She showed up on time. She listened. She didn't insert herself where she wasn't needed. She left when her hours were done. That night, as Mara said goodbye and Leo waved from the hallway, Daniel felt something unfamiliar tug at his attention. Not suspicion. Not concern. Just curiosity. It arrived uninvited and stayed longer than expected. Mara thanked him, as she always did, and stepped out into the evening. Daniel watched from the doorway, absent-mindedly noting the way she walked, unhurried, purposeful, like someone who had somewhere to be but didn't feel rushed getting there. When the door closed, Daniel stood still for a moment, listening to the house settle back into silence that he told himself the feeling would pass. Curiosity usually did. He finished the dishes, checked his email, read Leo a short chapter from a book they'd been halfway through for weeks. By the time Leo was asleep, the feeling had not passed. It had sharpened slightly, like a question that hadn't been fully formed yet. Daniel didn't think of himself as intrusive. He respected boundaries. He paid well. He kept his professional and personal lives separate. But something about the shape of his days had begun to feel narrow, and he didn't yet know why. Mara, to Daniel, existed mostly within the walls of his house. She arrived mid-morning, helped Leo with schoolwork, prepared lunch, handled the quiet chaos of childhood with patience, and left in the evening. Daniel realized, standing alone in his living room, that he had no idea what her life looked like once she stepped outside. This wasn't unusual. He didn't know the after-hours lives of most people who worked for him. But the realization stuck. Perhaps because Leo had mentioned, casually, that Mara liked to fix things. Or because she had once asked for an afternoon off to attend a community thing, a phrase so vague Daniel hadn't known how to ask follow-up questions without sounding intrusive. That evening, without much planning and with more self-justification than he cared to admit, Daniel picked up his keys. He told himself he needed to clear his head. He told himself he was going for a drive. When he pulled out of the driveway, he didn't yet know where he was going. It wasn't until he reached the end of the street and saw Mara walking toward the bus stop that the decision quietly solidified. He slowed his car, keeping a respectful distance, his chest tightening not with excitement but with an odd sense of responsibility. He wasn't following her out of suspicion. He wasn't trying to catch her doing anything. He was, in his own mind, observing. Learning. Understanding the world just beyond the edge of his own routines. Mara boarded the bus. Daniel followed in his car, keeping far enough back that he could pretend, if he needed to, that he was simply headed the same way. As the bus moved through neighborhoods Daniel rarely visited, he noticed the shift in scenery with mild surprise. The streets weren't dangerous or desolate. They were ordinary. Small shops. A public library. A park with tired benches and a basketball court lit by flickering lights. This wasn't a hidden world. It was just one Daniel had never needed to see. When the bus stopped near a modest community center, Mara got off. Daniel parked across the street and watched as she entered the building, greeting someone at the door with a familiar nod. He checked his watch. It was early evening. Whatever this was, it wasn't a secretive affair. It was scheduled. Normal. Daniel waited, unsure what he expected to feel. He imagined boredom, maybe mild embarrassment at his own curiosity. Instead, he felt unsettled, not because of what he was seeing, but because of how little he had known before. Through the large windows, Daniel could see people gathering. Folding chairs. A whiteboard. A table stacked with tools, actual tools, not symbolic ones. Mara rolled up her sleeves and joined a small group near the front. She looked different here. Not dramatically so. Just engaged. Present. Like someone whose attention had been activated rather than managed. Daniel realized, with a small jolt, that he had only ever seen her in the role she played for his family. He had never considered the version of her that existed when she wasn't responsible for someone else's schedule. He sat in his car for nearly an hour. He didn't go inside. He didn't take photos. He didn't text anyone. He just watched people come and go, listened to muffled sounds of conversation and laughter through cracked windows, and let a quiet discomfort settle in. The discomfort wasn't about Mara. It was about himself. About how easy it had been to build a life so efficient that other people's complexities became invisible. About how wealth, for all its conveniences, had subtly narrowed his field of vision. When Mara finally left the building, Daniel started his car and drove away before she reached the street. He didn't need to see more. He had already learned something he hadn't known he was missing. That night, lying in bed, Daniel didn't frame the experience as a discovery about his nanny. He framed it as a realization about himself, that his life had become so well contained that curiosity felt like an event. And that, perhaps, was something worth paying attention to. End of paragraph 1. Next, paragraph 2 will continue the story development and deepen the internal conflict.